On March 15, 1987, social workers entered a modest Cape Cod home at 2847 Ridgemont Avenue in Springfield, Massachusetts. They were responding to an anonymous tip about potential neglect. What they discovered in the basement would become one of the most disturbing cases of human captivity in American history. In the corner of a dank, windowless room, investigators found a contraption that defied comprehension, a human-sized exercise wheel, crudely welded from industrial pipes and chicken wire. Inside, malnourished and disoriented, was 23-year-old Michael Daly, who hadn't seen daylight in 4 years. His own mother had kept him there. The medical examiner would later testify that Michael's leg muscles had atrophied to the point where he could barely stand. His teeth had rotted from a diet of pet food pellets. His fingernails had grown into spirals, having never been cut during his captivity. But the truth was far more terrifying than a single case of maternal madness. Before we uncover the truth about the hamster wheel of death and the basement prisoner kept like a rodent, make sure to subscribe to the Silent Abbey and ring that notification bell. We bring you the darkest corners of American history that textbooks forgot. Drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from. We love hearing from our community of mystery seekers around the world. Now let's descend into the darkness. The year is 1983. Ronald Reagan sits in the White House. MTV has just launched. The nation is gripped by the Cold War, and the AIDS epidemic is beginning its devastating march through American communities. But in Springfield, Massachusetts, a different kind of silent plague is taking root, one hidden behind closed doors and drawn curtains. Springfield in the early 1980s was a city in transition. Once a thriving manufacturing hub, the closure of several factories had left neighborhoods economically devastated. The Forest Park neighborhood, where our story unfolds, was a patchwork of working-class families struggling to maintain their grip on the American dream. Houses that had once symbolized post-war prosperity now showed signs of decay, peeling paint, overgrown lawns, and that particular kind of quiet that signals a community turning inward. 2847 Ridgemont Avenue was a modest 2-story Cape Cod-style home, painted a fading yellow with dark green shutters. To neighbors, it was unremarkable. The lawn was kept trim, the mailbox was painted. Nothing suggested that within those walls a horror was unfolding that would challenge everything we think we know about maternal instinct and human cruelty. Barbara Daly was 52 years old in 1983. To her neighbors, she was the widow who kept to herself after her husband's death in 1979. She worked the night shift as a medical records clerk at Mercy Hospital, a job that required attention to detail and discretion. Those who knew her described her as mousy, polite, and forgettable. She attended St. Catherine's Catholic Church sporadically. She paid her bills on time. She was, by all accounts, invisible. Her son Michael had been different. Neighbors remembered him as a bright, energetic teenager who loved basketball and had dreams of becoming an engineer. He'd graduated from Springfield Technical High School in 1982 with honors. Several neighbors recalled seeing him that summer, talking about his acceptance to the University of Massachusetts Amherst. And then, quite suddenly, he disappeared. When asked, Barbara had a ready explanation. Michael had decided to move to California to pursue opportunities in the emerging tech industry. He was working for a startup in Silicon Valley. He was too busy to visit. He called sometimes, but the time difference made it difficult. It was a perfect lie for the era. The early 1980s saw thousands of young people migrating west, drawn by the promise of the computer revolution. Parents across America were familiar with the pain of distance, of children called less and less as they built new lives. Barbara's story was both plausible and common enough that no one thought to question it. But in Barbara Daly's basement there was no California dream. There was only darkness and a wheel that never stopped turning. The first sign that something was wrong came in October 1983, just 3 months after Michael's alleged departure for California. Agnes Kowalski, the 67-year-old neighbor who lived next door at 2849 Ridgemont Avenue, reported to police that she had heard strange noises coming through the shared wall between the houses. It sounded like crying, she told Officer Raymond Briggs in her initial statement, which would later become a crucial piece of evidence. Not regular crying, but this high-pitched whimpering, like an animal in pain. It would go on for hours, usually starting around midnight. Officer Briggs visited the Daly residence on October 17, 1983. Barbara answered the door in her nursing scrubs, having just returned from her shift. She was apologetic and embarrassed. The sounds, she explained, were coming from the television. She'd been watching late-night horror movies to help her sleep after her husband's death. She'd turned down the volume. She was so sorry for disturbing Mrs. Kowalski. The complaint was marked as resolved. Officer Briggs noted in his report that Mrs. Daly was cooperative and reasonable, and that the house appeared clean and well-maintained from what he could see of the living room. Agnes Kowalski heard the sounds again the next night, and the night after that, but she didn't call the police again. In working-class Springfield, you didn't make waves, you didn't want to be seen as the neighborhood complainer, you learned to live with things. The second incident occurred in February 1984, when postal carrier Donald Martinez noticed that the Daly mailbox was overflowing. "I'd been delivering there for 6 years," Martinez later testified. Mrs. Daly was always very regular about collecting her mail, but suddenly there were letters piling up. Some of them looked important, bills, that kind of thing. When Martinez knocked on the door to check on Barbara, she appeared disheveled, with dark circles under her eyes. She apologized profusely. She'd been working double shifts at the hospital. She'd forgotten. She took the accumulated mail with trembling hands and closed the door quickly. What Martinez didn't know, what no one could have known, was that Barbara had been spending every spare moment in the basement, perfecting her creation. The wheel was almost complete. She'd been welding late into the night, the sounds masked by the furnace and her careful timing during the day when neighbors were at work. The third incident should have triggered alarm bells throughout the community, but it didn't. In May 1984, Dr. Patricia Greenfield, a veterinarian at Springfield Animal Hospital, sold Barbara Daly 50 pounds of commercial-grade hamster pellets. "She told me she was starting a small breeding operation," Dr. Greenfield recalled during the trial. "She said she was breeding dwarf hamsters to sell to pet stores. She seemed knowledgeable about their care. I had no reason to question her." Over the next 3 years, Barbara would purchase over 1,200 pounds of hamster pellets from 3 different veterinary suppliers. She rotated her purchases to avoid suspicion, never buying more than 50 pounds at a time from any single location. The pellets were nutritionally complete, designed to keep small rodents alive and healthy. Barbara had done her research meticulously. They would become Michael's sole source of food. The fourth escalating incident came in August 1985, when a water main break on Ridgemont Avenue required city workers to inspect basement connections in several homes. Barbara refused to allow them entry. City Inspector Thomas Riley documented the interaction in his official report. "Homeowner became extremely agitated when we requested basement access. She claimed there was extensive water damage and mold, making it unsafe. She said she would handle repairs privately and threatened to call her lawyer if we insisted on entry." Technically, Barbara was within her rights. The water main damage was external to her property line. The city workers moved on to other houses. In his report, Riley noted, "Homeowner's behavior was unusual but not threatening. Recommend follow-up in 6 months to verify basement repairs." That follow-up never happened. The fifth and perhaps most chilling near discovery occurred in November 1986, just 4 months before Michael's rescue. A fire inspector conducting routine safety checks in the neighborhood knocked on Barbara's door. She wasn't home, she was at work, but her basement window was slightly open, and Fire Inspector Linda Wu noticed something that made her pause. There was a smell, Wu later testified. It wasn't smoke or anything fire-related, but it was wrong. Musty, but also organic, like a barn or a zoo. And I heard this rhythmic creaking sound like someone rocking in a chair, but constant. It never stopped. Wu made a note to return when the homeowner was present. She left a notice on the door, but when she came back 3 days later, Barbara was ready. She gave Wu a tour of the first floor and the upstairs bedrooms. She explained that the basement smell was from a water heater leak she was in the process of fixing. She'd hired a plumber. The paperwork was upstairs if Inspector Wu wanted to see it. The creaking sound, old pipes, they made noise when the heat kicked on. Linda Wu left satisfied. The notice was marked complete. Barbara had been calm, helpful, even friendly. She'd offered coffee. She'd chatted about the weather. And in the basement, Michael had continued turning the wheel, his atrophied legs moving in the mechanical rhythm that had become his entire existence. Each of these incidents, viewed in isolation, seemed minor, explainable, not worth pursuing. But together they formed a pattern that screamed of something deeply wrong at 2847 Ridgemont Avenue. The community had been given multiple opportunities to save Michael Daly. At each turn they had accepted the easy explanation and moved on with their lives. This is how monsters hide in plain sight. If this story is giving you chills, hit that like button. Share this with someone who loves dark mysteries, but maybe warn them first. The question that haunts every investigator who worked this case is simple: how did no one know? How did a young man vanish in a working-class neighborhood where everyone knew everyone else's business? Let's discover what happens next. March 15, 1987, begins like any other Sunday morning in Springfield. The temperature hovers around 42 degrees. A light rain falls. At St. Catherine's Catholic Church, Father Michael O'Brien delivers his sermon on forgiveness and redemption, unaware that within hours, his concept of human depravity will be forever altered. At 10:47 a.m., social worker Jennifer Holloway parks her state-issued Ford sedan in front of 2847 Ridgemont Avenue. With her is Springfield police officer Marcus Washington and Child Protective Services investigator Robert Chen. They are responding to an anonymous tip called in 3 days earlier, a tip that had been vague but insistent. Check the Daly house, check the basement, something's wrong with the son. The caller had hung up before providing more details. The tip might have been ignored entirely, except that it had come to the direct line of CPS supervisor Helen Morrissey, who had a reputation for following her instincts. Morrissey had run a missing persons check on Michael Daly and found nothing. No death certificate, no California driver's license, no tax records, no college enrollment. For a young man who supposedly moved to Silicon Valley in 1982, Michael Daly had left no paper trail whatsoever. That absence of evidence became evidence itself. Bara Daly answers the door in a pink bathrobe, her gray hair uncombed. She looks confused to see them. Is something wrong? She asks, her voice thin and tremulous. Jennifer Holloway will remember this moment for the rest of her life. In her official report she writes, "Subject appeared genuinely surprised by our presence. Her affect was flat but not defensive. She did not immediately ask why we were there, which struck me as unusual." Officer Washington explains, "They need to inspect the premises following up on a wellness check." Barbara's hand tightens on the door frame. "What kind of wellness check? I'm fine, everything's fine." "We need to see the entire house, ma'am," Washington says firmly, "including the basement." The color drains from Barbara's face. For a moment Holloway thinks the woman might faint. Barbara's mouth opens and closes silently. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she says something that will be quoted in every news report about the case. "Please don't take him away from me. He's all I have left." The basement door is locked, with 3 separate deadbolts. Barbara's hands shake so badly that Officer Washington has to take the keys from her and open it himself. The smell hits them immediately: ammonia, feces, unwashed human body, and something else, something chemical and wrong. The wooden stairs creak as they descend. Robert Chen later describes the moment as descending into hell. The basement is dark except for a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. As their eyes adjust, they see it. The wheel is approximately 7 feet in diameter, constructed from welded steel pipes and wrapped in chicken wire and plastic mesh. It's mounted on a crude axle system that allows it to rotate freely. Inside the wheel, naked except for a filthy cloth diaper, is what initially appears to be a large, hairless animal. It takes Jennifer Holloway several seconds to realize she's looking at a human being. Michael Daly is curled in a fetal position at the bottom of the wheel, his body skeletal, his skin covered in sores and lesions. His hair has grown to his shoulders and is matted with filth. His fingernails and toenails have grown grotesquely long, curling back on themselves. His eyes are open but unfocused, staring at nothing. "Jesus Christ," Officer Washington breathes. He radios for an ambulance immediately. Robert Chen approaches the wheel carefully, speaking softly. "Michael, can you hear me? We're here to help you." Michael's head turns slightly toward the sound. His lips move. Chen leans closer to hear the words that will haunt him for years. "Time to run. Mama says it's time to run." The wheel is surrounded by a complex system that Barbara has engineered over the years. A gravity-fed water dispenser hangs on one side, the type used for pet rabbits. A modified hopper on the other side dispenses hamster pellets at timed intervals. Beneath the wheel, a collection tray catches waste, which drains into a rudimentary sewage system Barbara had illegally tapped into the house's main line. On the basement wall, Chen finds a chart. It's detailed, meticulous, written in Barbara's neat handwriting. It tracks Michael's exercise schedule, 4 hours on, 2 hours off around the clock. It records his feeding times. It notes his behavioral issues and the corrective measures taken. The entries span 4 years, nearly to the day. The most recent entry, dated March 14, 1987, just 1 day earlier, reads, "Subject lethargic, refusing to run. May need nutritional supplement. Will monitor." When the EMTs arrive, they find Michael's leg muscles have atrophied so severely that he cannot stand. His joints have frozen in place from years of repetitive motion. He weighs 87 pounds. He should weigh approximately 160. His teeth are rotted stumps from the pellet diet. He has pressure sores covering 30% of his body. He is severely dehydrated despite the water dispenser, suggesting he been too weak to drink properly in recent days. Most disturbingly, when EMT Sarah Rodriguez touches his shoulder to reassure him, Michael recoils and immediately begins making a running motion with his legs, even though he's lying on a stretcher. His body has been so thoroughly conditioned that the touch of a human hand triggers the compulsion to run. Upstairs, Barbara Daly sits at her kitchen table, rocking back and forth. When Jennifer Holloway asks her why, simply why, Barbara looks up with tears streaming down her face. "I couldn't let him leave me," she says. "Not like his father did, not like everyone does. So I made him a home where he could never leave, where he could be safe, where I could keep him." In the basement, as Michael is carefully lifted from the wheel that has been his entire world for 4 years, Officer Washington notices something that makes his blood run cold. Mounted on the wall directly in Michael's line of sight is a mirror. A full-length mirror, positioned so that no matter where Michael was in the wheel, he could see himself. Barbara had wanted him to watch, to see what he'd become. The investigation into Barbara Daly and the imprisonment of Michael Daly would become one of the most complex criminal cases in Massachusetts history, raising questions about mental health, criminal culpability, and the failures of community oversight that allowed such horror to persist for so long. Michael Daly was transported to Mercy Hospital, ironically, the same hospital where his mother had worked for over a decade. He was immediately admitted to the intensive care unit under the supervision of Dr. Raymond Alcott, a specialist in severe malnutrition and physical trauma. Dr. Alcott's initial medical report makes for grim reading. Patient presents with severe muscle atrophy, particularly in the lower extremities. Quadriceps and hamstring muscles have deteriorated to approximately 30% of normal mass. Patient cannot stand or walk without assistance. Range of motion in hip, knee, and ankle joints severely limited due to years of repetitive motion in a confined space. Malnutrition is severe, with visible signs of multiple vitamin deficiencies including scurvy, rickets, and beriberi, diseases we typically only see in third-world famine conditions. But the physical damage, as severe as it was, paled in comparison to the psychological trauma. Dr. Patricia Holbrook, the psychiatrist assigned to Michael's care, documented what she termed captivity-induced dissociative disorder, a condition so rare that it had only been observed in a handful of cases worldwide. "The patient exhibits a complete break with external reality," Dr. Holbrook wrote in her initial assessment. "He refers to himself in the third person. He becomes extremely agitated if he remains still for more than a few minutes, showing signs of severe anxiety including hyperventilation, panic attacks, and self-harm behavior. He has internalized his mother's schedule to such a degree that he becomes distressed if feeding time is delayed by even a few minutes." Most disturbingly, Michael initially resisted rescue. In the first 72 hours of his hospitalization, he repeatedly asked to go home and to return to the wheel. He couldn't understand why he'd been taken away from safety. The wheel, the basement, the endless running, these had become his entire conception of normal existence. While Michael fought for survival and sanity in the hospital, Barbara Daly sat in a holding cell at the Springfield Police Department, undergoing the first of what would be dozens of psychiatric evaluations. The question facing prosecutors was deceptively simple. Was Barbara Daly evil, or was she insane? Dr. Leonard Walsh, a forensic psychiatrist with 30 years of experience, was the first to evaluate her. His report, filed on March 20, 1987, is a chilling document that reveals the complexity of Barbara's psychology. Mrs. Daly demonstrates no signs of psychosis. She is fully oriented to person, place, and time. She understands that her actions are considered wrong by society. However, she exhibits what I can only describe as a complete moral inversion. In her mind, she was protecting her son. She genuinely believes she was acting in his best interest. During interrogations, Barbara was cooperative to the point of being helpful. She provided detailed explanations of her methodology, seeming almost proud of her ingenuity. She'd designed the wheel herself, she explained, after months of research into animal husbandry and rodent behavior. She'd read extensively about hamster care, about how to keep small animals healthy in captivity. She'd adapted those principles to human scale. "I made sure he had everything he needed," she told Detective Sarah Mendez during a recorded interview on March 18th. "Food, water, exercise. He was safe. No one could hurt him, no cars could hit him, no drugs, no bad influences. Mothers lose their children every day to the world. I made sure I'd never lose mine. When asked about the mirror, why she'd forced Michael to watch himself deteriorate, Barbara's expression didn't change. He needed to see. He needed to understand that this was his life now, that there was no going back. The sooner he accepted it, the happier he'd be. The investigation into how Barbara had managed to construct and maintain her torture chamber for 4 years revealed a level of premeditation that shocked even experienced detectives. Search warrants executed at her home uncovered 3 years' worth of receipts for hamster pellets, purchased from 7 different veterinary suppliers across 3 counties, detailed journals documenting her plans, dating back to July 1982, before Michael had even graduated, high school architectural drawings of the wheel, with measurements and engineering calculations, a collection of books on rodent behavior, animal training, and mechanical engineering, correspondence with the University of Massachusetts Amherst, where Barbara had forged Michael's signature on withdrawal papers in September 1982, claiming he was dropping out due to personal health issues. Perhaps most damning were the audio recordings. Barbara had installed a tape recorder in the basement, and she'd documented everything. Hours upon hours of tape captured Michael's deterioration, his initial protests and pleas, his eventual resignation, and finally, his complete psychological breakdown. The tapes also captured Barbara's voice, speaking to him through a speaker system she'd installed. "Time to run, Michael. Good boys run for mama. You're doing so well, you're safe here. The world wanted to take you from me, but I'm smarter than the world." The prosecution, led by District Attorney Victoria Chambers, charged Barbara Daly with kidnapping, false imprisonment, aggravated assault, and attempted murder. They sought the maximum sentence of life in prison without parole. Chambers' opening statement at the trial, which began on September 14, 1987, was blunt. This was not a mental health crisis. This was not a mother's love gone wrong. This was calculated, methodical torture spanning 4 years. Barbara Daly is not sick. She is evil. The defense, led by public defender Arnold Goldstein, argued for insanity. They brought in their own psychiatric experts who diagnosed Barbara with severe delusional disorder and complicated grief following her husband's death. They argued that Barbara genuinely believed she was protecting Michael, that she lacked the capacity to understand the wrongness of her actions. The trial lasted 6 weeks and became a media sensation. The hamster wheel horror, as the tabloids dubbed it, captivated the nation. Court TV broadcast the proceedings live. Oprah Winfrey devoted an episode to the case. The Boston Globe ran a front-page feature titled "The Mother Who Caged Her Son." Public opinion was divided. Some saw Barbara as a monster who deserved the harshest punishment available. Others saw her as a severely mentally ill woman who had fallen through the cracks of an inadequate mental health system. Support groups formed on both sides. Michael himself did not testify. His psychiatric team deemed him too fragile, and DA Chambers agreed that forcing him to confront his mother in court would be re-traumatizing. Instead, the jury watched videotaped depositions in which Michael, speaking in a flat, emotionless voice, described his years in the basement. The most powerful moment came when the prosecution played one of Barbara's audio recordings in court. The entire courtroom, including several jurors, wept openly as Michael's voice from 1984 begged his mother to let him go, promising he'd be good, promising he'd stay nearby, promising anything if she'd just let him see the sun again. On November 3, 1987, after deliberating for 18 hours, the jury returned a verdict: guilty on all counts. They rejected the insanity defense. In a statement released after the verdict, jury foreman David Martinez explained their reasoning. "We believe Mrs. Daly knew exactly what she was doing. She knew it was wrong. She did it anyway. The planning, the cover-up, the lengths she went to avoid detection, these are not the actions of someone who's lost touch with reality. These are the actions of someone who knows they're committing a terrible crime and doesn't care." Judge Harold Weinstein sentenced Barbara Daly to life in prison without the possibility of parole. At the sentencing hearing, he addressed her directly. "You took your son's youth, his health, his sanity, and very nearly his life. You transformed a bright young man with a future into a broken shell of a human being. You did this not out of love, but out of selfishness. True love means letting go. You couldn't let go, so you destroyed what you claimed to love. There is no punishment adequate for what you've done." Barbara showed no emotion as the sentence was pronounced. She was transported to Messy Framingham, Massachusetts Women's Prison, where she remains to this day. She has never expressed remorse. In prison interviews over the years, she has maintained that she was right to keep Michael safe. Meanwhile, Michael Daly faced a different kind of life sentence. His recovery would be long, painful, and ultimately incomplete. The physical rehabilitation took 2 years. Through intensive physical therapy, Michael slowly regained the ability to walk, though he would always walk with a pronounced limp. His joints had been permanently damaged by years in the wheel. He underwent extensive dental work to reconstruct his teeth. He gained weight slowly, his body having forgotten how to process normal food. The psychological recovery was far more challenging. Dr. Patricia Holbrook would work with Michael for over 5 years, and even then, she considered his case only partially successful. In a 1995 interview with Psychology Today, she reflected on his treatment. Michael will never be normal. The years in the wheel fundamentally altered how his brain processes reality. He struggles with agoraphobia. Open spaces terrify him. He's most comfortable in small enclosed spaces. He sleeps in a closet in his apartment because beds feel too exposed. He compulsively exercises, sometimes for hours, because sitting still triggers anxiety. The wheel may be gone, but in many ways he never left it. Michael has lived in a state-sponsored group home for adults with severe psychiatric disabilities since 1990. He has never been able to hold a job or live independently. He sees his therapist 3 times a week. He takes a cocktail of medications for anxiety, depression, and PTSD. He has never given a public interview, but in a letter to the court in 2005, when Barbara filed an appeal which was denied, Michael wrote simply, "I don't hate my mother. I can't. She's still my mother. But I'll never understand why she thought turning me into an animal was." The Barbara Daly case sent shockwaves through American society, forcing a national conversation about family privacy, mental health intervention, and the responsibility communities have to protect vulnerable individuals from those who claim to love them. In the immediate aftermath of Michael's rescue, Massachusetts completely overhauled its adult protective services protocols. The Daly Law, passed in December 1987, mandated that social workers must physically inspect all rooms of a residence when conducting wellness checks. With no exceptions, anonymous tips regarding adult welfare must be followed up within 48 hours. Regardless of how implausible they seem, utility companies must report households with unusual usage patterns that might indicate illegal activity or captivity. Medical professionals must report any individual purchasing excessive quantities of animal feed or supplies that could reasonably be adapted for human captivity. The law was revolutionary in extending protections typically reserved for children to vulnerable adults. It acknowledged that adults could be victims of captivity and abuse within their own families. The case also sparked a broader examination of parental rights versus state intervention. Civil liberties groups argued that the Daly Law gave government agents too much power to invade private homes. But victims' advocates countered that privacy cannot be a shield for abuse. Dr. Jennifer Clark, a sociologist at Columbia University who has studied the case extensively, argues that the Daly case represents something deeper about American culture. We have this mythology of the sacred family unit, the idea that what happens within a family home is private and beyond scrutiny. But the Daly case reveals the dark side of that mythology. Barbara Daly was able to torture her son for 4 years because we're culturally conditioned not to interfere in family matters, even when we see warning signs. We prioritize family privacy over individual safety, and people like Michael pay the price. The case influenced how mental health professionals think about grief and complicated bereavement. Barbara's descent into monstrosity began, most experts agree, with the death of her husband in 1979. Robert Daly had died suddenly of a heart attack, leaving Barbara alone with a teenage son who would soon leave for college. The combination of loss and impending abandonment created what psychiatrists now call a catastrophic attachment disruption. Dr. Leonard Walsh, who evaluated Barbara, later published a paper titled, "When Grief Becomes Captivity: Understanding Pathological Control in Bereaved Parents." In it, he writes, Mrs. Daly's case represents an extreme example of what can happen when grief is not processed in a healthy way, and when the fear of additional loss becomes all-consuming. She couldn't bear the thought of losing her son as she'd lost her husband, so she engineered a situation where loss became impossible. In her mind, Michael in the basement, alive but imprisoned, was better than Michael in the world, where he might die or simply forget about her. The case also raised uncomfortable questions about how we define sanity and criminal responsibility. 3 psychiatric experts testified that Barbara was legally sane. She knew right from wrong, she knew society would condemn her actions, and she took elaborate steps to avoid detection. Yet many mental health professionals who studied the case afterward argued that no truly sane person could do what Barbara did. This paradox, that someone can be technically sane while committing acts that seem incomprehensibly insane, challenged the legal system's binary approach to mental illness. Some legal scholars have argued that the Daly case demonstrates the need for a third category between sane and insane, diminished capacity due to severe personality disorder. In the years following the trial, several similar cases came to light suggesting that Barbara Daly was not an isolated aberration, but rather part of a disturbing pattern of familial captivity that had been hidden in plain sight. In 1989, authorities in Oregon discovered that Janet Williams had kept her adult daughter chained in a backyard shed for 7 years, claiming she was protecting her from demonic possession. In 1993, police in Florida found 3 adult siblings who had been locked in their childhood bedrooms by their parents for over a decade, fed through slots in the doors, ostensibly because the parents feared they would fall in with the wrong crowd. In 2001, the Turpin House of Horrors in California revealed that parents had kept 13 children and young adults captive in conditions of extreme abuse and neglect, with some shackled to beds. Each of these cases echoed elements of the Daly case: isolation, rationalized as protection, physical confinement, justified as love, and communities that saw warning signs but didn't intervene. The psychological concept of pathological enmeshment, where a caregiver's identity becomes so intertwined with their dependent that they cannot tolerate separation, has been studied extensively in the wake of these cases. The Daly case is now taught in forensic psychology programs as a textbook example of how love, twisted by mental illness and grief, can become indistinguishable from torture. Springfield itself struggled with the stigma of the case for years. The house at 2847 Ridgemont Avenue was eventually demolished in 1991, after sitting vacant and vandalized for 4 years. No one wanted to live in the hamster wheel house. The empty lot remains today, a small patch of grass surrounded by chain-link fence, a neighborhood wound that never quite healed. Agnes Kowalski, the neighbor who first reported the strange sounds, gave an interview to the Springfield Republican in 1997, on the 10th anniversary of Michael's rescue. She was 77 years old and dying of cancer. She wanted, she said, to confess. I knew something was wrong. Deep down I knew, but I told myself it was none of my business. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself that nice Mrs. Daly couldn't possibly be doing anything wrong. But the truth is I was scared. Scared of being wrong, scared of causing trouble, scared of what I might find if I pushed harder. And because of my cowardice, a young man suffered for 4 more years. I'll die with that guilt. Her confession resonated with many in Springfield and across the country. How many of us have sensed something wrong and chosen comfort over confrontation? How many Michael Dalys are still out there, suffering in silence, while communities choose not to see? The Daly case ultimately forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature. That evil often masquerades as love, that monsters rarely look like monsters, and that our most dangerous impulses often come wrapped in the language of protection and care. Barbara Daly genuinely believed she was being a good mother. That's perhaps the most terrifying aspect of the entire case. She wasn't a cartoon villain twirling a mustache. She was a lonely, grieving woman who loved her son so much that she destroyed him. She couldn't distinguish between love and ownership, between protection and imprisonment, and in that failure of distinction lies a warning for all of us about the thin line between caring for those we love and controlling them, between keeping them safe and keeping them captive. What do you think drove Barbara Daly to such unthinkable acts? Was it grief, mental illness, or something darker that lurks in the human heart? Leave your theories in the comments below. We read every one of them, and your insights often shed new light on these dark chapters of history. Michael Daly is still alive today, living quietly in Massachusetts, still struggling with the psychological scars of his captivity. His story is a testament to human resilience, but also a reminder of how far agile the human mind can be, and how completely it can be broken by those who claim to love us most. If this story affected you, please consider subscribing to The Silent Abbey. We explore the forgotten horrors and hidden tragedies of American history, the stories that make us uncomfortable, but that we need to remember so they never happen again. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an episode. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this story, someone who understands that the real monsters aren't always strangers in the dark, Sometimes they're the people sitting across from us at the dinner table. Thank you to our community of mystery seekers around the world. Your engagement, your comments, your willingness to explore the darkness with us. It matters more than you know. I'll see you in the next video. Until then, remember, the most dangerous prisons are the ones built by people who love us. Stay curious. Stay continue.